Morning. There we go. I'm going to have to jet right after this. We've got a markup on one of my pieces of legislation at 10 o'clock. It has to do with brownfield legislation. And if anything coming from our industry or where we can have effect is getting some of our best sites available for industrial development and growth. It looks like we're going to get that bill today, at least out of committee. So I want to be there to defend that. Secondly is, Jennifer, you didn't even comment about who helped you a little bit on we are connected at the hip with USG because in West Virginia and across the country where we burn coal, and you burn coal in 48 of the 50 states, we create fly ash. And prior to coming to Congress, the people that were unaware of the impact that fly ash has on an industry were talking about labeling it as a hazardous material, which much like asbestos. But they didn't understand how fly ash has such an impact. It's not only in our concrete, it's in our gyp board, it's in our bricks. I could go on. And we were able to get that passed last year. It was over 32 years in the work. But in 6 years, I was able to get that thing finished in my first run at that. But it's something that I think is important. It underscores how people just don't understand construction. They don't understand what we do. And that's part of my point of my remarks. If I could quickly just, I was going to cut this out, but in deference to time, but I do like to add into it. It's just a little humor here. Is that when I came, I had 50. This is my 52nd year that I started in construction. Back in 1965, I went out on my first construction site, and I never left it. It's something I have a passion for. We had an architectural engineering practice that grew to was the largest in the region, and we traveled around the country doing projects. So I just loved doing construction projects. But I got talked into getting into politics in 2010, and I came here, and my wife and I were walking the Capitol one night. It was kind of late at night, and I don't know whether you've seen the dome at night when it gets lit up, and it moved me that night for some reason. And I turned to my wife and I said, "Did you in your wildest dreams ever imagine we'd be here?" She didn't miss a beat. She looked right back at me and she said, "Honey, you're not in my wildest dreams." I think it's a reflection about engineers. I'm a civil structural engineer from Purdue, but my home is West Virginia, and I'm the 7th generation there. So let's talk for a moment about an iconic American industry, auto manufacturing. For decades, Detroit and the industry has been this symbol of the American strength in the economy. Its supply chain reaches all across the country. Just think about it. Someone's making the glass, the piping, or the tubing, the wiring, the cable trays, all that goes into an automobile, as they're all brought to Detroit and assembled. They employ over 1 million people. But during the crisis of 2008, the federal government stepped up and said, these boys are hurting, and we had to bail them out. Think about now. Let's pivot to another industry that we may have some thoughts about as we sit here. It's larger than the auto industry. It has 2 times the economic impact of the auto industry. It employs 7 times the number in the manufacturing. But it's an industry that we just construction industry. But it's just simply not held in the same esteem as the auto industry. Yet it has a far bigger contribution to our economy, far larger with it. Think about what it takes to build an office building. First we have to have a survey, both topographic and boundary survey. Then you have to have some geotechnical exploration, some assessments. You might have environmental impact study. You have all those that come into play. Then you get to hire my firm to do the design of that building. So we're putting people to work. Then the contractors and subcontractors start collecting. Once the bid is received, they're starting to get proposals so that they have something to assemble everything from the foundations up to the HVAC system for the mechanical contractors. But what is that doing? This is what we're doing in our industry. We're pulling together from structural steel to copper wiring to glass, so it's tubing to gyp board. on and on and on. All of those are being pulled into, just like an automobile, we're assembling something that comes out of the ground and you can stand up and be proud of. Just imagine how many jobs are created from one construction site, if you just followed the chronology of what I was talking about. But unfortunately, most Americans, and I tell you, certainly most people in Congress have no idea of the impact. So this idea of index and more focus we can have on this is going to be very helpful. Think about it. 95% of Americans own a car, but maybe their only experience with a construction operation is maybe a bathroom renovation or a kitchen addition or something like that. They just don't understand it. And keep in mind, too, only 15 members of Congress out of 535 have a construction background. They've never carried a lunch pail out to a construction site. Now, I recognized that early on because I'm just one of 2 engineers in Congress, 2 licensed engineers. Now, Joe Barton out of Texas is the other one, by the way. And I often will talk about the 2 engineers versus 242 attorneys. Now, like Seinfeld said, not that there's anything wrong with that, but there is. There is when it comes down to infrastructure. Who do you want talking about the construction industry? A bunch of lawyers or people that have come from the field that understand the impact of the jobs that we're going to create if we can get this thing momentum going with this? So we've had hands-on experience. And what I did, one of the things we did a couple years ago was put together a construction caucus. We thought it was long overdue. Don Norcross out of IBEW lineman joined me, and we were able to put this caucus together. We have about 85 members now. And our purpose of this is primarily to educate the members of Congress about what we do, because we just take it for granted. We're worried about the auto industry when we ought to be focusing on the bigger thing of the construction, our stimulus package, where we should have been putting more money in bricks and mortar, or what we're going to do in the infrastructure bill on things of that nature. So this is where we were trying to do. We're trying to bring Republicans and Democrats together. He's a Democrat from New Jersey, I a Republican from West Virginia, and we've got labor, business associated on that. It's really developing into a very interesting new caucus. And it wasn't as painful as birth when we started that. So as we consider some of these issues that we're going to be facing, I think there are 3 things we better take into consideration. One, and we've already mentioned it a little bit here today, was workforce development. And that is that we're going to need, with the billions of dollars that are being considered in all these construction projects, particularly the infrastructure bill, we're going to need a lot more workers. And they've got to be trained for those to be able to do that. But to do that, we also have to be looking at the behind the scenes with that, and that is doing a better job in our colleges, in our secondary schools, is getting people trained into STEM education. I was told at one of the universities I was speaking, we only have 4.5% of our undergraduates in STEM education. When I was in China last year on energy issues, they confided in me they have 22% of their undergraduates in China are in STEM education. We'd better get our act together to be competing on a local level or a global level. And we also need to be focusing on career and technical education to make sure we do a better job getting people with hands-on experience, so when they get out, they're ready to go to work with that. We passed, the House passed some changes to the Perkins program last year, and I thought it was very effective. But the Senate didn't take it up. They need to understand. They don't understand some of these impacts with these. So we also need to be focused, I think, all under this workforce, is apprenticeships. Let's make sure that we keep our apprenticeship programs going, because we've got 1,600 of them across the country that are funded under their bargaining rates, is how they've been able to do that. So there's no federal money necessarily. Oh, there's some, of course, in it, but not of any significance. Most of it is internally driven so that they have a workforce. The second is investments. How do we, the investment in our country's infrastructure. Now, we took a big step last week when we passed the Dodd-Frank. That was intended to free up capital so small companies will be able to get to those facilities, get to be able to get banking and have access to capital more readily. Keeping in mind that until this is ultimately passed by the Senate and signed by the President, we're still losing small banks and community and centers, credit unions. One a day across the country is closing. We've got to do something to be able to finance our small industries, our small companies. So then the financing also comes into for the infrastructure bill. We're going to have more public-private partnerships, the infrastructure bank, the alternatives to gas tanks. I could go on with all those, but I think primarily what we're going to really do is try to use the Dodd-Frank changes with it. But one of the others is we better change our tax code. That's going to be one that we also pivot in Congress to be able to do, because our industry, whether you're aware of that or not, the construction industry pays the highest effective tax rate of all industries in America. 31%. They understand. I don't think they grasp the impact that could have if you could decrease that tax. And that's what we're going to be working on that. Is once we get the health care bill behind us, I know we're going to turn and we're going to start addressing a tax reform. And that's going to be one of them where we're going to try to lower the taxes. And I'm going to be very vocal trying to take sure that we protect our construction industry and get that tax rate down. And then we need regulatory certainty in our business. And that's going to also come into play very strong with this, because just keep in mind, and those of you that have been involved in that construction program, what it takes to get a project out in the field. Look what's happened over the years on this bureaucratic nightmare of paperwork, and now the process. It takes, now we just had a hearing on the other day, it takes 10 to 12 years to get a permit for a hydroelectric dam. 10 to 12 years to do that. We got other the environmental impact statements can take up to 5 years in addition to that to be able to handle those. The archaeological impact studies that you can have with it can also come into play with it. But just contrast that with where we are today with this mindset we have, and go back a few years when we did the Alaska pipeline. 1 year, and they built the pipeline. Hoover Dam, 2 years, and they went into construction. I don't think anyone's looking back and talking about how we've wiped out the caribou or we've destroyed something on the Colorado River or whatever. We made things work, but unfortunately I think what we've had is allowed the government to get a little bit too big. So we need to streamline this process and ensure a shortening of this permitting process with it. And why do we should be concerned about that? Just a little bit, some of the comments that were made here earlier. From the time that big project begins, the time it cash flows, there's a problem in there if someone in financing lost money. This occurs in there. Someone's having to finance that. So the project developers, they're expending millions of dollars while they're waiting before they can put their first shovel in the ground. We've got to find a way to speed that up, because it will lower our construction costs if we can do that. And I think it's going to be necessary for that to do it. So those of us that are connected to the construction industry, we understand. We just got to get the rest of the people around the country aware of it. But and don't forget, most Americans don't understand our industry. I know most of the members of Congress don't understand. It's our job, yours and mine, to be vigilant, vocal, outspoken. Keep working and make sure people understand the impact of what it has. Because someone without a job isn't going to buy a car. We've got to make sure people understand how this connects in our whole economy. So as we address this infrastructure bill, let's go out and make America great again. Thank you very much for having me here today.